Hello and welcome to the Terminology Leading Practices stream of the Snomed CT Expo 2021. My name is Andrew Atkinson and I'm the Release Manager at Snomed International, and I will be moderating today's session. Please use the live Q&A in your AirTouch device to type your questions to the presenter. Questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation. I'm now very pleased to introduce Sarah Harry of Termlex in the UK, who will be presenting Addressing the Real Business of Lab Test Orderables and Reportables, Beyond Simple Maps. Sarah, please proceed.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name's Sarah Harry. I'm a terminologist of 15 years experience. I'm a dialysis nurse by background before venturing into the world of Read and Snomed at NHS Digital in the UK, where I managed the pathology bounded code list, PBCL, and was heavily involved in building the new UTL, Unified Test List for the NHS. I then moved into the application side, working with Jay Kohler at Termlex. I presented at last year's Expo, describing how content patterns in the lab world could be used to drive innovative interface design and semi-automate content creation in Snomed in the lab world. I'm going to describe the wider world beyond a simple one-to-one map between one code and another, to more genuinely represent the real world of lab and to better support staff really in using the power of Snomed CT. So we're sharing our experience of mapping to Snomed CT in lab over the past year. I should add that probably each of these slides could form the basis of a presentation in its own right. So inevitably, we're going to skim the surface of some of these things, but we'd be really happy to explore any of these subjects further with people because we're really excited about it. Okay, so addressing the real business of lab test orderables and reportables beyond simple maps and using the power of Snomed CT. I've got a brief outline there, but I'll move on from that and get straight in really. Well, so setting the scene. Okay, what's a test? What's a lab test? Let's start there. So a test can be quite tightly defined actually in formal metrology terms, but generically it could be an order for a test. It could be the performed test or assay or the series of assays within a lab, or the reported results or the interpretation of those as well, and so much more, of course. And that's a basic concept. What does Snomed cover within that test detail? Okay, so here's a simple result: a serum plasma sodium 146 millimoles per litre, reference range in there somewhere, and a high-low range alert that will be tacked onto the end. That's the basis of it. So in Snomed, we can definitely do the serum plasma bit, the specimen. We can do the sodium, the component. We can do the property, which in this case would be a molar concentration. It tells you that the value represents that molar concentration and to expect a unit that fits that type. And we could also do the method and technique if that's appropriate. Wouldn't necessarily be worth coding here. So it could possibly do some of the other things here. There are Snomed codes for high and low. There's a finding code for hyponatremia. You can code presence, absence, some of the base units, but we wouldn't expect to see some of that in here. But it's certainly possible within the fire message context. We wouldn't expect in Snomed the number there of 146. We wouldn't expect comments and text. We wouldn't expect units to be represented there routinely, particularly if we're using a standard like UCOM, and that's where we'd expect to see those things represented. Of course, there'll be lots of other things in the actual test result, lots of IDs, quality assurance things, kits and analyzers. I'm not going to go there. Okay, so that's tests. What about mapping? So what do we mean by mapping? Well, rarely is it as simple as drawing a line between two things that say precisely the same thing. Now, I'm sure a lot of people here will already know that only too well. But what we could do, we could look at the maps within a single system. And so here we're talking about migration from non-standardized to standardized units in Snomed CT, or from legacy, read, PBCL, Snomed 2 to Snomed CT. Talking about older green screen, black box things, systems where, you know, Fred, who knew how it worked, retired 10 years ago, to newer systems. So we can't find a great difficulty in getting the data out of them. Okay, and that's all the other information that goes along with them. But what we do find actually is the more common requirement is to actually be mapping between systems, from system A to system B. And so it tends to be things like mapping from a LIMS system to an electronic health record system, a LIMS to a GP system, and LIMS to LIMS as well, where we might have send away tests, things sent to central laboratories for testing, specialist labs, and sent back again. And that whole journey gets a variety of coding along the way. So we have multiple variants of legacy, non-standardized codes to be migrated and mapped to Snomed CT between systems that might actually have different levels of maturity and support for Snomed CT. And there are other ways, that other things that could be standardized as well, but we'll again leave those to one side. So here are some possible representations that you might see in local lists. Again, of just something simple like sodium. So there could be Na+, sodium. We could have serum sodium, plasma sodium, blood sodium. We could have levels, concentrations. So there's a variety of things that we need to be able to map. And on the right-hand side, we've got some of the things that we might be able to map to, particularly in the UTL in the UK, in the observable entity hierarchy. So we've got very little information on the left-hand side, and we've got to make an assertion of a map, an association to something here on the right, which might be, say, by default, a quantity concentration, because there's very little else to go by. But we might actually say, well, no, we always report sodium as a molar concentration, so we can actually map it to this one. But you can see already that we're making clinical assertions about the relationship between these two things. It goes beyond the actual words on the left-hand side, so it gets more complicated. And some of those things are fairly straightforward, but it can get into a world where those assertions actually can be quite risky, and have to be done very carefully and correctly. So what about blood there? So, you know, we've got something that blood is blood an equivalent of serum or plasma, or either of those? And so those are the sorts of decisions to make. We might need to make this something that's in fluid rather than serum or blood, just to make it completely generic. And I've just added a couple of a LOINC code representation there, which is roughly similar, but a slightly different format, and again with MPU. And that's just for information, really. And just to kind of round this off, it's just to show the ecosystem, really. It's complicated. You're starting to get the idea here. So we've got different systems, primary care, hospital systems. We've got all the different standards that we need to be able to map to. We've got local test lists, national lists. We've got reporting to public health. We've got QA requirements, and we've got clinical specialisms and domains. So that's a lot to it. You get the idea. Some examples of some of the mappings we've come across and could do and can work on. So we've got a relatively simple list here. We can do some of this fairly quickly. We can match things up with some SNOMED codes, acid esterase, actual bicarbonate, acute kidney injury score. Some of these things might need a little bit of discussion, but they're basically mappable. Things can get a little more complicated. Some microbiology and immunology tests here. Acanthamoeba DNA. Okay, what are we going to do about this DNA? Are we going to quantify it? Is it a presence? How are we going to go about detection? So there's some questions. Indices we could probably handle, but we need to check up on what this access is. And some slightly more complicated ones here. APTTs. we can probably handle some of this with about manual and automated. Here's a multiple thing. We'd have to sort of just see what's going on with this one. And we've got reagents and test kits involved with some of this. Here's an interesting one. This one's a UK NEQAS test. So this is actually a QA test. This isn't actually on a patient. This is a QA check of the system and of the processes involved for lab accreditation. A perfectly valid use case for a test row. But how are we going to handle that in SNOMED? Interesting stuff. This is the world that we're in. And another set of examples here, slightly more elaborate one. Here we've got on the left-hand side a request code, and on the right we've got some result codes that are associated with those. Okay. So we can see that we've got both request codes and result codes associated, and here we can actually manage these. We can actually manage this association between the request and what we might include in the results from that. There'll be a comments field and the actual result that we want to send, or a series of a set of results. So there's some associations that we can build between these. We can do that at a local level. We can also associate these requests with SNOMED codes and these results with SNOMED codes, and we can actually handle the association at that level as well, and between those levels. So there's a lot that can go on this in this interface that we've been working with that can handle this level of mapping complexity. And you can see there's quite a lot going on here. Okay, our experiences of using Snomed CT. We've got there's good coverage of the of results in Snomed. In the UTL, that's in the UK, that's now got over 4,000 concepts in version 1.0 that's just been published. So that's pretty good, really, in terms of volume coverage. In terms of disciplines, again, volume-wise, it's covering things pretty well, but there are some disciplines where that haven't been gone into yet. But there's pretty good coverage, certainly as well on the request side and the procedures as well in international SNOMED. So it's pretty good. There is content in the lab domain, as we've been able to see, that can't really be easily mapped to SNOMED CT, and there's operational data and patient demographics and the rest. So there is things that content that may be problematic. What we could cover in SNOMED and expand upon, things like panels and profiles. There is, as I say, some content, quite a lot of content in the procedure hierarchy for request types, but it's not been elaborated. It's not well structured. It's reliant on local interpretations of what those things mean and what those things include. There's certainly a lot more scope to kind of define editorially what these panels and profiles consist of. And we could also look at things like specialized techniques. And one example of that is nucleic acid amplification tests. So the various PCR subtypes and things that you can actually use, they're not actually well represented in SNOMED in the techniques hierarchy for modeling observable entities. So that's an area where, you know, there's room for collaboration improvement here. I know in Sweden they're looking at building on the methods hierarchy, and there's certainly scope for panels and profiles as well. You know, in the community content area, if we had definitions of these things and editorial lines on these things that were internationally understood, we could really kind of nail some of this down with a lot more clarity. So what do people do with all these mappings then? What's the point of them? Well, a lot of it can be about the aggregation of tests via categories. So we'll look at some of that. Use cases. Okay, so we've got some idea of the nature of the problem, the complexities. Can we simplify some of this? We certainly can. What are the use cases here? We have high-level use cases of buckets, if you like, of containers for operational reporting. We might well want to count the volume of tests, simple volumes, the number of blood science tests, the number of immunology tests. We might want to compare those. We might want to compare them between labs. We might want to retrieve and manage all blood bank content, which is heterogeneous in domain origin. So we want to be able to collect that in some way. And in the UK, as everywhere else, costs are important. We'd want to be able to check on the volume of tests. We'd want to be able to compare between labs, update some of these. We'd want to be able to separate out requests and results as well. On costs and test utilization, best clinical practice as well, of course, and make sure we're using up-to-date techniques, not outdated ones. The associations between requests and results, again, as I was saying about orderable types, there's certainly a need to be able to separate those things out operationally. So that's quite an important area, and I've shown a way in which that can be done within an interface. Display. If you're a clinician and you've got a patient expressing an allergy in front of you, and you want to check out what allergy tests are available, you just want to see those. So we want to actually see that list available, not the whole of what your lab can do. You might well want to put electrolytes into a list so that you can chart them, put them in graphs for trending over time from a specific kind of U&E clinical definition. So it's very valuable. We might want to actually pull out all our PCRs, and we might want to check, what tests we're doing, specifically what methods we're using, particularly for PCRs. We might want to update those. We might want to review them in various ways. Okay, how do we categorize all this lab stuff that clearly people want to be able to structure and analyze and report upon? There are different ways of doing this. One way, well, we can get things out of the box. So here with the UTL, we have a set of categories that comes with the product. There's a column for this, and so it gives specialism and subspecialism. And so what this is showing in this little dynamic thing, pretty colored thing here, is versions of the UTL, version 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9. Whoops. Let's go back. I accidentally clicked. And it's just showing the difference, the percentage differences in types of content over time. So we've got a practical application of the sorts of categories. However, we're not sure if this is going to continue. It may not continue in the long run. And of course, there may be, they may not best represent things in your local lab. And so that might not be useful. So what else can we do? Well, there's Snomed-based categorizations, of course. There are a number of options here. We can use a DL classifier, description logic classifier, to organize test concepts. We can use intermediate concepts. We can look at machine derivable ref sets. So let's have a quick look at what we might be able to do here. So using a DL classifier for organizing content in Snomed, and what we're going to do is have a look at some E2O work. So this is evaluation to observable work that's been going on international level. So interesting work that I've been involved in, led by Daniel Carson in Sweden and Jim Campbell at Nebraska. And we've taken a draft OWL file being worked up by the group, and we've done a bit of experimenting on it. It's to move to migrate some evaluation procedures to the observable entity hierarchy. Here's just a snapshot of part of that list. Not an ideal list, maybe. It's a very big list. And what we've done is we've played around with this OWL file in Protege, and we've got a subset here of urine tests for various substances, and we've also got a list of tests done in blood as a specimen. Okay, So what can we do with these? Let's see if we can organize some things interestingly with those categories. Here we go. So the blood science test, and urine tests. So these are two concepts we've created in Protege, which we are looking to use to classify content. And what we do with each of those is we put the appropriate attributes and value sets in with those concepts. So we model them. And here it's blood and plasma and serum. And we do the same with urine for the urine test one. And we can run the classifier and see what it can do for us. And yay, we get a really neat an appearance of everything that's actually a test done on blood specimen appearing under this blood science test concept. And if we do the same with the urine test, we get the same, all the urine tests lining up very neatly under there. Now, that's obviously you can do all sorts of different things, all sorts of different categorizations here, and it's just a simple example, but it's really powerful, really, really useful for people to be able to classify. It's a good demonstration of that. So we can classify the content in SNOMED using intermediate concepts. So that's, yeah, we don't, it's not always ideal to do that. And I know there'll be people going, that's not maybe the best way of doing things. So, but I think there certainly are some very good cases for doing that. There may be functional definitions where that's actually a very valuable way of doing it. But of course, there's a lot of scope for congestion and confusion and a wild west if everybody's adding in concepts however they feel like to classify things. So it does need some control. But it's a very effective way of doing it. Excuse me. So what else can we do? We can use general class inclusion axioms to actually define the classes more specifically. So SNOMED International can say, this is how these things should be structured. Okay, we could replace the defined concepts that I showed you with actually a machine readable expression that generates a ref set. And then we can simply display that ref set using the functionality in an application as if it had that intermediate concept header. So it's just a different way of getting to the same thing, and perhaps a more principled way of doing it. And these ref sets can be extension specific. We can pre-compute them for people who don't have the classifier. We can version and maintain those. Again, this is something for collaboration. There's a lot here, in terms of if we were actually looking to have reusable ref set definitions in this area, great scope for collaboration so that we can get some predictable structure of content internationally. Okay, so I just briefly want to show you a non-SNOMED, non-semantic way of organizing content. So there are ways outside of SNOMED from doing this. And here, I'm just showing you something that's in an interface that we've got where we can actually use tagging of content for specific operational purposes. So I talked about the NEQAS quality assurance program before. If we want to actually just see our NEQAS concepts, well, we can actually tag all those concepts in the interface very easily. And then we've just got a slider control on here, and we can actually say, show me only the NEQAS concepts, or filter the NEQAS concepts out. We can do the same for sendaways. So all our tests sent to other labs and brought back, we can actually just identify those within our local code list. So simple, effective, user-friendly way of quickly sorting content that doesn't require us to do that kind of Protege heavy lifting type stuff, but it's still just as effective. Yeah. And I just really want to finish with what this can do in kind of real world situations using Firebased analytics. Okay, so we've got these operational categories and we've got functional groups. We've got things that we can actually set up for use for clinicians managing lists, but there's actually patient end applications using Fire that we can see here. And in here, what we can do is we can take an observation profile here, which would be the case, obviously, for laboratory results. And here we've got some patient IDs here, and we've got some vital signs information, and we've got at the bottom a total cholesterol as well. So we're actually showing from the categories we've got a range of results for these patients, or that patient. It could be an individual patient. And if we want to see more about total cholesterol measurements, we can actually search for that. So find me all the total cholesterol measurements for this patient, and we actually get a time series of their total cholesterols. Good stuff. We might want to see other things. So what if we wanted to see something like viral serology? Okay, so we can just select that from our categorization list, and we can actually just show the patient's viral serology history. So this is categorizations in action. So it's not just about managing those lists, it's actually about real world stuff in the patient world. Okay, so we've been able to see the various ways we can categorize lab tests in a complex world using both the power of Snomed and some non-semantic techniques. And we can see how we can deploy these categorizations, not only for content management, but to drive patient records as well. And so my name's Sarah Harry. Thank you very much for your time. You can contact Jay Kohler or me to explore any of this further. Please feel free. We're also grateful to NHS Grampian, by the way, in Scotland, for allowing us to share examples from their test lists, and to Daniel Carlson and the Snomed International E2O work group for the draft OWL file to experiment with. Thank you. And over to the team, over to Andrew.
Thank you very much for your excellent presentation, Sarah. Can I please ask that attendees give us a moment while we switch over from our pre-recorded content so that Sarah can address the questions you have been submitting live. Please note that this session will be available on the event platform for the next 3 months. Thank you very much, Sarah, for that excellent presentation. Please welcome Sarah and Jay to the session. They have been very kindly answering all of your questions on the aircast as we've been going through the presentation. All of them have now been answered, but if you have any more questions, please feel free to send them in, and Sarah and Jay will answer them. Please also feel free to contact them in the green room or anywhere in the Expo sessions, so that if you have any further questions on that. We do have one quick question for you just before the session ends. Sarah and Jay, do you think that Snomed CT needs to model relationships between requests and the results that they produce, which are also known as procedures and observables?
Jay, you're muted.
You're muted, Jay. No. Sarah, do you want to take that one?
I'll go with that one then. It's an excellent thing to be doing, and a lot of people would like to be able to do this. Some people haven't necessarily thought about it yet. It's not really something for Snomed. I think there's a lot of work that we can do with between suppliers and provider organizations. But I don't think we can really assert what a liver function test or a complete blood count, full blood count is in Snomed. I think that's not the way to go. But it's a good field to get involved in. We've been doing a lot of work in that area.
Okay, thanks. And one really quick one just before we finish. Any plans to get UTL into community content for other countries who want to get involved with it?
Not a question for us, but we would love to refer that question to NHS Digital.
Yeah.
But if you do want to access UTL and see what is in there, whether it's useful or not, get in touch with us, because we've got a tool that allows you to browse and see what is exactly in the UTL. Even NHS Digital sometimes uses that tool to actually just, create graphs of it, right? But yeah, get in touch, please.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Sarah and Jay. And any other questions? There's a couple of extra questions have come in just at the end there. Any other questions can be answered afterwards. And please continue to contact them whenever you have any further questions. Thanks very much again.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye now. Okay, so I guess we can stop. Is that right? All right, Sarah. See you.